1992, Suffolk County, Long Island. This was not a nice raid, and no humans were involved at all. Unmarked federal officers arrived. They told all Suffolk County Police, New York State Police, and New York State Park Police to leave. Lock down a county public park. No information after that. No explanation, nothing. It just doesn't make any sense, you guys. This story went away. Nobody knows about this story, and I'm going to talk about it right now.
At Southaven Park, right there on Long Island, New York, November 24th, 1992. It's a date and a location that becomes this powerful anchor point.
Right. And our mission for you, the listener, is absolutely specific today. We need to be crystal clear about this.
Yeah.
We are not trying to define the phenomenon itself. We're not here to label an object or declare what crashed, or even if anything crashed in the way we usually think of it.
No, our focus is purely on analyzing the signals, the data points. We have testimony from at least 5 credible independent witnesses.
And when you say independent?
I mean, people who did not know each other, they didn't talk to each other before the event, they were all engaged in completely different activities, and yet they all independently identified the same small area of Southaven Park as the focal point.
They all pointed to the same spot on a map. What was that spot?
The location specified over and over in the investigative reports is incredibly precise, roughly 200 yards into the park's interior.
Okay.
Specifically situated near the skeet shooting field and the adjacent woods. And that precision is what matters.
Right, because it doesn't matter if one person thought it was a flare and another thought it was a small plane.
It doesn't matter at all. The fact that they all pointed to 7 p.m. on November 24th, 1992, and this one specific small clearing, that's the essential ground truth. That geographical agreement is the anchor that roots this entire investigation in a physical, verifiable reality.
It makes you wonder about the context, though. This isn't some remote wilderness. It's Long Island. It's a densely populated area, even near a park like that. So who were these witnesses?
We can basically categorize the first wave of people who reported something into at least 2 distinct groups, and they offer different perspectives on the event.
Okay.
First, you have what the reports call Witness Group 1, the motorists. These were several people who were just driving along the nearby Sunrise Highway. It's a major road out there.
So they're seeing it from a distance.
Exactly. The reports of these drivers indicated they saw what they thought was a small plane or some kind of object descending, coming down directly into the park just after 7 p.m.
So they have a line of sight view. They see the trajectory of this object right before it vanishes into the park's boundaries.
That's right. Then you have Witness Group 2, the local residents. These were people whose homes literally bordered the park.
So they're much closer.
Much closer. And their testimony was less about the trajectory and more about the result. They reported hearing these incredibly loud rumbling sounds, intense high-pitched whines, and seeing strange, very intense lights that were coming from within that specific zone inside the park.
So you have one group seeing it come down from the outside and another group right on the edge experiencing the noise and light from the inside.
But the one piece of testimony that truly, truly grounds this location agreement, it comes from the most unlikely source, the person they call the rustic resident.
Let's dig into that one because the sources really highlight his sincerity, this idea of sincerity under duress.
They do. The cabin resident, as he's called, wasn't just an observer looking up at the sky. He was literally on the ground 200 yards into the park, right near that skeet field.
In the exact spot.
In the exact spot.
Yep.
And he was actively engaged in an illegal activity. He was trespassing to gather firewood for his stove. He was there out of necessity.
So he had every reason to stay quiet. Everything to lose by speaking up.
Everything. He deeply feared being exposed for using the park's resources without permission. But he spoke up years later because of the undeniable physical reality of what he experienced.
What did he see?
Well, first, what he heard. He recounts carrying wood back to his old pickup truck when he was just overwhelmed by this sudden, incredibly loud noise. He described it as a huge, rushing air sound with a high-pitched whine.
And it was close.
So close and immediate that it just stopped him in his tracks. And then the visual. He wasn't getting a distinct glimpse from the highway. He saw something coming in low out of the night sky.
What did it look like to him?
He described it as flying on its side and looking partly on fire. And crucially, his timing anchored the event perfectly with the motorist's reports. But his description of the impact, this is key. He said he heard it hit the ground, not with a big explosion, but with a big splat.
A splat.
Big splat. It suggests a very dense mass impacting soft, maybe marshy terrain, rather than, volatile combustion or a metallic crash and rupture.
I have to pause on that. This man is out there stealing wood just to stay warm, just to survive. And he decides that is the moment to risk everything and tell investigators what he saw years later, just because of a sound and a light.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you everything about the magnitude of the event. It had to be powerful enough to overcome his primary survival instinct, which was to hide what he was doing.
He absolutely was. His testimony is it's contaminated by his fear of being caught, but that actually makes it more credible because it aligns so perfectly with the time and the general location cited by all these other unrelated people.
So what we really have here is a phenomenon of, let's call it sensory overlap without a shared narrative. They all agree on the time and the place, but what they perceived, that varied a lot.
And that variation is actually foundational evidence. It points to an external physical anchor. If they were all sharing a delusion or making up a story, their narratives would probably be more consistent, more aligned.
Right, they'd all be describing the same thing.
But here, they're reporting diverse sensory inputs, all tied to that one single zone. Visually, the cabin man saw fire and movement. Another witness, a friend's wife who was coming home from Thanksgiving shopping, saw a large, oval, egg-shaped object on fire crossing the sky.
And there's another account, a really specific one.
Yes, a terrifyingly specific one. A white flash that made night appear as day.
That's a huge difference. From a partially burning object to a flash of light that turns night into day, just for a moment. The audible reports vary just as much, right?
They did. The sounds ranged from those initial loud rumbling sounds to the distinct impact, that big splat, and then, maybe the most disturbing detail from the sources, reports of yelling or screaming coming from the woods in the immediate aftermath.
So if we synthesize this, it suggests that when you have multiple independent sources reporting all these different sensory inputs, light, sound, motion, even those aftermath noises, and it's all converging on the exact same geographical coordinates.
It powerfully suggests a common, external, physical event. It wasn't a shared story. It was a physical disturbance that created measurable, if varied, effects in a very strictly defined physical space.
Which brings us to the human response. Moving from the objective location data to the subjective, but just as important data of human behavior under stress.
Yes. This often reveals the sincerity of an experience more eloquently than the actual testimony. We have to focus on what people did immediately after the event.
That distinction is so critical. We're looking at actions under duress, and the overwhelming immediate reaction here was, it was immediate flight. It was pure survival instinct. Nobody stuck around to take a picture.
Nobody. Let's go back to the cabin man. The moment he heard that impact and saw the object, he became, in his words, really terrified.
He didn't investigate.
He did the opposite. He immediately dropped the wood he was carrying. He sacrificed the entire reason he was there, which was critical for him to stay warm, and he just ran to his truck.
And his immediate thought, it's documented, was a primal fear.
It was. That no one knew where he was, and that if he didn't get out right then, he may never be seen again.
That is profound behavioral stress. That's not the behavior of someone who saw a novelty or something easily explainable. It's the behavior of someone who is convinced they have just stumbled upon something terrifyingly outside the bounds of normal human experience.
And this fear informed everything he did next. He eventually got back to his cabin, but the sources note a really strange physical anomaly tied to his truck.
The ignition.
The ignition. His old truck would not start easily for days after the incident. It suggests some kind of lingering technical or electromagnetic effect in the area that affected his vehicle's systems.
And the fear didn't stop when he got home.
Not at all. He was too afraid to report what he saw because he was trespassing. But he was also terrified that whatever was in those woods, whatever was making those noises, including the yelling or screaming he'd heard, might follow him.
So he locked himself in.
Locked up his cabin and stayed awake all night with his shotgun right by his side. That reaction pattern, immediate flight followed by days of paranoia and defensive action, that is the definition of genuine, immediate terror. Not curiosity, and certainly not a desire for notoriety.
And other witnesses confirm this sense of urgency, this feeling that a window was closing. There's an account of one witness who only just made it out of the area on an access road before the roadblocks went up.
It's as if the primary goal for anyone close to the event wasn't to figure out what it was, but simply to escape the vicinity before something trapped them there.
And that urgency leads right into the next phase. The post-event silence and fear. Once these people were safe, they stayed quiet. For years.
They actively avoided attention. They avoided exposure, which It fundamentally contradicts the profile of someone who's inventing a sensational story to get attention.
The reasons for their silence were complex, too. It shows these subtle but really powerful mechanisms of social and professional suppression.
It does. One witness requested total anonymity because of his sensitive job, and he stated plainly that if his employer thought he believed in the claims he was making, they would fire him immediately.
And that's a huge potential consequence, just for what you believe. And then there's the social ridicule.
Right away. We mentioned the local radio announcer who quickly started offering aluminum foil hats to anyone making claims. That effectively ensures that anyone who dares to speak up is immediately branded a crank. It chills speech.
So the sources show this clear pattern. Whether the fear was legal, like the cabin man's trespassing, professional, like the guy with the sensitive job, or social, just the fear of being ridiculed. The net effect was the same.
The same. These were genuine fears that made witnesses actively avoid attention. They stayed silent for a long, long time. And that pattern of extreme fear and prolonged silence, it just adds enormous weight to the physical reality of the initial event.
It was something they wanted to forget, something they feared exposure over, not something they wanted to broadcast for 15 minutes of fame.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we shift from the human reaction to the institutional one. If this had been something easily explainable, a small plane crash, a military exercise, a brush fire, the response should have followed a predictable local procedure.
It should have. But what the sources document is, it's a rapid, highly anomalous, and federally driven escalation.
This might be the most compelling part of the analysis because institutional behavior, it leaves a paper trail, even if that trail is mostly one of denial and anomaly.
It is, and we have to reinforce this key point. This was a rapid replacement of authority, not assistance.
Yeah.
The chain of escalation is a vital data point. It points to the sheer significance of whatever happened at that convergence point.
Okay, so let's walk through that chain. Initially, like with any reported incident, local authorities respond.
Correct. Local and park police did set up the initial roadblocks. They were operating under the claim that they were responding to a reported fire in the park.
But then, almost immediately, the first big red flag.
A huge one.
Yeah.
Local fire departments who were called in to fight this supposed fire were then inexplicably turned back.
Just told to go home.
Yes. Imagine being a local fire chief and being told, "Thanks, but no thanks, we've got it covered," for a fire happening in your own jurisdiction. It's a profound break from standard protocol.
And who took over? It wasn't Suffolk County or New York State Fire Services?
No. The fire response was assumed by the federally controlled Brookhaven National Laboratory Fire Department, BNL.
This signals an immediate and massive escalation of control. It's completely outside the normal local or county jurisdiction. Let's give some context here for the listener, because Brookhaven National Laboratory is a very significant facility.
It's an extremely significant facility. It's a multi-program research lab operated for the U.S. Department of Energy. Their work involves nuclear physics, high-energy particle accelerators, and a lot of related federally protected research.
So the question is, why is the fire department from a federal facility dedicated to energy and nuclear research responding to an alleged brush fire in a public park?
That is the question. BNL's fire services are specialized and federally mandated. Their presence signals that the incident, whatever it was deemed significant enough, or perhaps involved materials or technology sensitive enough, to bypass the entire local emergency response hierarchy.
And it places it directly under federal technical control.
Exactly. It's the institutional equivalent of a 5-alarm warning. And the escalation didn't stop there. The sources document other anomalous activities that went on for days.
The helicopters.
The helicopters. Repeated reports of military-style helicopters, described as dark, unmarked, and utility size, flying these systematic grids over the park for days afterward.
Been on the ground.
On the ground, witnesses reported seeing plain-clothed, all-black officers establishing and maintaining the roadblocks, operating with a kind of military precision and silence.
And this all suggests a highly professional, coordinated containment and recovery operation that it far exceeds what you'd need for a simple park fire.
Far exceeds. And what's perhaps most telling about the level of control and secrecy is the evidence of what the sources call anomalous police behavior.
Right, this is where it gets very strange. The state police, who are a higher authority than local park police, were reportedly refused entry.
Refused entry to the cordoned-off area by these unknown black-clad personnel. Think about what that implies.
Yeah.
If a local emergency happens and the state police arrive, they have jurisdiction.
Of course.
To have state police vehicles physically turned away by unidentified personnel, suggests an authority higher than the state, most likely federal or military, had established complete operational control. And they were overriding typical legal jurisdiction inside a public New York State park.
And what about the local officials who were there at the very beginning?
They quickly adopted a strategy of absolute denial. Sources recount stories of local police and fire officials just issuing complete denials, claiming they were never there or had nothing to do with it.
And treating lifelong friends and neighbors who ask questions like they were strangers.
Exactly. The speed and severity of those official denials suggests an immediate, coordinated imposition of silence, likely mandated from a higher authority. It's a classic pattern of information vacuuming. You displace the local knowledge with federal control, and then you immediately enforce denial at the local level to kill public inquiry before it can even start.
This all leads us to the most concrete administrative data point we have. The unprecedented park closure. Let's frame this with just the hard facts. Southaven Park was officially closed to the public for multiple days, specifically from Wednesday, November 25th, right through to Saturday, November 28th, 1992.
And the official explanation given to the public for this closure?
Duck hunting.
Duck hunting.
I can just hear our listeners raising an eyebrow at that. So what does the data tell us about that particular explanation?
Well, the data point is crystal clear. It speaks volumes by its rarity. Southaven Park, according to records that investigators later reviewed, had never been closed for duck hunting before this incident.
And since?
Nor has it been closed for that reason since. It is a singular, isolated, and highly unusual administrative action, and it was perfectly timed to cover the necessary duration for a complex, non-standard cleanup operation.
So if you put it all together, the federal fire services taking over, state police being denied entry, the unmarked helicopters, and the statistically unprecedented park closure.
The conclusion is that responses this coordinated and this unusual do not happen for minor events or misidentified aircraft or routine fires. This entire institutional pattern is evidence in itself of a significant event that required a very high-level containment and recovery operation.
And if the human response was fear and the institutional response was denial and control, then the ground itself provides the objective, measurable evidence of a physical disturbance.
Yes. And these findings were collected later by investigators who managed to gain access to the park after it reopened.
We have to treat these findings as pure, objective environmental data. Let's start with terrain disturbance. What did the investigators find at that convergence zone near the skeet field?
They documented clear physical trauma to the environment. The specific findings included an area that was observed to be significantly burned out, which indicates some kind of high-temperature exposure.
Okay.
Additionally, they found evidence that suggested extreme force. Several trees were bent over in a non-natural pattern, and a large section of the area looked like it had been plowed over by machinery.
So you have a combination of high heat and tremendous mechanical force.
A huge amount of force exerted on the landscape. And this data aligns perfectly with what the cabin man said later. When he eventually went back to the area, he said the woods had been thoroughly swept. It's an almost surreal detail.
It is. He described the park floor as looking dusted off. He said it looked as if they came in and took every twig and log and leaf that was lying around in the woods. He called what was left a false, fake wooded area.
That indicates an intensive, highly meticulous cleanup. It wasn't just designed to remove large debris, but to normalize the appearance of the terrain, to leave absolutely no small physical evidence behind.
You don't need to remove every single leaf for a standard plane crash. That scale of cleanup implies the removal of material that was considered highly sensitive or maybe dangerous.
Exactly. The physical recovery was paramount. And the infrastructure changes confirm this industrial level of activity. Dirt paths and access roads were reportedly widened, specifically near the rifle shotgun range.
To get heavy equipment in and out.
You can see the evidence of it. Heavy tire marks, flattened or broken trees that were not there before the incident. It all points to the use of substantial machinery, requiring the operational infrastructure to be modified to facilitate whatever this cleanup crew was.
Okay, so moving beyond the physical terrain, let's get into the most technically complex but also highly compelling data set. The reported electromagnetic and radiation anomalies?
Yes. And these are not subjective observations. These were specific measured data points collected at the site.
Detailing these is essential for a listener to grasp the sheer magnitude of the disruption.
It is. Investigators reported finding measurable, higher than normal radiation readings compared to the standard background levels for the Long Island area.
And for context, typical background radiation on Long Island is extremely low. We're talking maybe 0.01 to 0.02 millieronidins per hour, What did they find?
They found readings that were significantly elevated and, crucially, that exhibited a specific temporal pattern. This wasn't a steady background radiation. It was measured in 6-second bursts,
Or pulse bursts.
ranging from 0.05 milliardens to as high as 0.3. So we're looking at localized bursts that were 5 to 30 times higher than the local background. The pulse nature suggests a residual energy source or signature, not a natural geological or atmospheric thing.
That is a profound finding, especially given the rapid, meticulous cleanup that tried to normalize the area. But the electromagnetic disruption went even further.
It did. An electronics engineer tested the metal fence line near the affected area. Now, a stationary metal fence line like that, it typically holds a measurable low-level magnetic charge that's induced by the Earth's magnetic field.
Okay.
But the testing revealed the fence line had no magnetic reading at all. The natural charge had been completely stripped away.
So that suggests an extreme localized electromagnetic pulse, an EMP that just completely neutralized the magnetic properties of the surrounding metal infrastructure.
It's actually worse than neutralization. Further, highly specific tests on that fencing showed something even more anomalous. The metal exhibited signs of reversed magnetic polarity.
What does that mean?
It's consistent with exposure to a South Pole magnetic field. To clarify, think of the atoms of the metal. The magnetic field had been violently disrupted and then physically realigned in the opposite direction from Earth's natural North Pole field.
So whatever happened created a powerful local electromagnetic disruption that was severe enough to physically alter the magnetic signature of large metal objects nearby.
Yes, that is wholly incompatible with routine aircraft incidents or simple fires. That level of energy transfer points toward an event with immense and very unusual power.
And this localized disruption had peripheral effects, right? It wasn't just contained to the park.
No, it radiated outward. A resident living near the park reported power surges that lasted for 5 to 6 days. Bizarre phone calls. The phone ringing strangely with no one on the line, and persistent problems with household electrics and TV reception in the surrounding residential neighborhoods. The disruption wasn't just in the convergence zone. Its side effects were felt in the nearby community.
Okay, so we've established this pattern. Convergence on a physical point, fear-driven flight, and unprecedented institutional containment and cleanup, leaving behind these profound environmental anomalies. Now we look at the final piece, how the story itself was neutralized.
Exactly. Following that initial rush of reports, the containment, the cleanup, the official denials, the story was engineered to just vanish. And this process, this quiet fading, is a crucial element of the suppression pattern.
The narrative lost steam pretty quickly due to two main factors, it seems. First, the timing.
It happened just before the big holiday rush, Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's the perfect time for a major story to get swept off the front pages by the normal holiday news cycle.
And second, the effectiveness of the denial and the ridicule.
Highly effective. That institutional wall of denial, combined with the widespread social mockery, the aluminum foil hat comments we talked about, it successfully silenced public inquiry and made sure any other witnesses would recoil from exposure.
And the critical consequence here is the total lack of closure. No official explanation was ever offered, no public investigation followed, the site was physically normalized by the cleanup crews, and the story just quietly faded away.
And this is so vital for you to understand. Disappearance is not the same as resolution.
Yeah.
The facts were just sort of absorbed by the public consciousness and filed away under unsolved.
But the primary investigative effort into this event, that required a more aggressive strategy to make sure it never came back.
Right. And this leads us to the attention shift, the John Ford incident. This is the mechanism by which the Southaven inquiry was truly and professionally neutralized.
So John Ford was the chairman of the Long Island UFO Network, LAUMON. That was the main organization meticulously documenting the Southaven convergence. Then, in 1996, years after the event, he's arrested.
Arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder against local Republican officials. The charges involved this alleged plot to poison them using radium.
We have to frame this analytically. Regardless of the truth of the criminal allegations, we're looking at this purely as a mechanism for shifting attention and suppressing a narrative.
Exactly. Ford was eventually found to be delusional and remanded to a psychiatric facility. And the media coverage focused intensely on the sensational, bizarre criminal charges, the radium plot, the discovery of his massive cache of dozens of weapons, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and militia literature at his home.
And Those charges were so effective as a distraction because that content radium poisoning, political assassination, paramilitary gear, it's inherently more sensational. It's more culturally explosive. It generates far more immediate media coverage than a complex 5-year-old investigation into a physical event in a park.
The result was a total and predictable narrative replacement. The sensational criminal charges completely drowned out the preceding investigation into Southaven Park. Media focus replaced genuine inquiry into the events of 1992 with this intense, discrediting scrutiny of Ford's personal life and alleged crimes.
And Ford's own perspective on this reinforces that pattern of suppression.
He claimed from his incarceration that the entire criminal case was a frame-up and a smear tactic to destroy my UFO organization and to neutralize my effectiveness, because he was getting too close to the truth about the Southaven crash.
So again, we're remaining objective on the criminal charges themselves, but the net organizational effect is it's undeniable.
Undeniable. The primary organization investigating the Southaven convergence, Ala Ufafonon, was effectively destroyed. It halted any further meaningful collection or dissemination of the Southaven data. The story didn't get disproven. It got professionally drowned out by a strategic controversy.
All right, let's bring this all together for you, the listener. Let's synthesize this, focusing on the patterns, not the spectacle. We started with these disparate accounts of some kind of fiery object coming down into a tiny patch of Long Island Park on November 24th, 1992.
We have to review the chain of evidence as one unified pattern. You have multiple, independent, geographically separated witnesses, all converging on one small, specific spot. That's the anchor point, and detailing severe behavioral stress in flight.
And that emotional reality was met almost instantly with highly unusual institutional interference. Local authorities removed, federally controlled services taking over, and this was followed by a documented, rapid, and massive cleanup designed to sanitize the entire zone.
And then, most objectively compelling, you have the measurable physical and electromagnetic anomalies left behind. The burned terrain, the swept woods, the elevated pulsed radiation readings, and the damaging effect of that reversed magnetic polarity on the fence line.
The objective facts, when you take them all together, they suggest that something real happened at that convergence point. We don't need to define what it was to accept that the disruption was physical, external, and significant enough to trigger that kind of unprecedented federal response.
So what is the application of this knowledge for you, the listener? What's the realization we're guiding you toward based on all this analysis?
It's really the lesson of pattern recognition. The real power of this deep dive lies in that lineup. You have independent signals, witness accounts, environmental data, anomalous official denial, and they all confirm a physical event in a strictly defined space.
This is evidence, not necessarily of the content of the event itself, but of the magnitude of the disruption it caused, and of the sophisticated, multi-layered effort that was required to silence the facts. That's the ultimate realization here. Focus on the convergence of the patterns of behavior and data, rather than getting lost in interpretations or sensational claims about what the object was.
The most significant finding might not be the physical presence of an object, but the subsequent vacuum of truth and the patterns of suppression used, from subtle ridicule to outright criminal controversy, to make sure the facts just faded away without any resolution.
And so we return to the quiet aftermath, to the silence that was imposed on the narrative. The institutional response was immediate, it was coordinated, and it was effective. It swiftly turned a physical reality into a public denial. The convergence of all that independent testimony was met with an impenetrable wall of silence.
Keep focused on the data. Keep focused on the behavior. Keep focused on the systemic suppression. Because at the end of the day, this all circles back to one profound question for you to think about as you leave this deep dive.
If nothing unusual occurred, why did so many people experience the same place, the same disruption, and the same silence afterward?
Keep exploring those patterns of convergence and suppression. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.
Guys, if you're still with me, what do you guys think? There's so much to put into this story. I mean, it just really opens your mind about what's really possible here and the things that we aren't told that are in our backyard every day. Guys, just keep your eyes open. I'm going to be putting out more weird, interesting stories that you have never heard of. I'm going to have AI help me with some of it, some I'm going to do myself. But you guys, thanks for watching if you're still here. We'll see you guys on the next one.